So we're so grateful, certainly for the many blessings in the congregation that have allowed us to encourage and free sisters to go to the border to help. I think just about everyone got there before this new wave of COVID, which is certainly, putting so many volunteers on pause. So we're very grateful that you got there and you got home safe and sound. And for those of us who didn't go this round, we're looking forward to hearing from some of you so that we can have a little bit of an experience of what you experienced.
When the walls fell and the hungry child cried out for help, did you hear the sound? Did your heart break? Does your heart break now? Can I feel it in my soul? Can I see you? I'm alone. Can the blind have sight? Have sight? When you see us all alone, can you hear your people, Lord? Can the blind have sight? Have sight?
A moment of grace, a prayer for refugees. God of our wandering ancestors, long have we known that your heart is with the refugee, that you were born into time in a family of refugees, fleeing violence in their homeland, who then gathered up their hungry child and fled into alien country. Their cry, your cry, resounds through the ages. Will you let me in?
Give us hearts that break open when our sisters and brothers turn to us with that same cry. Then surely all these things will follow. Ears will no longer turn deaf to their voices. Eyes will see a moment for grace instead of a threat. Tongues will not be silenced, but will instead advocate. And hands will reach out, working for peace in their homelands, working for justice in the lands where they seek safe haven. Lord, protect all refugees in their travels. May they find a friend in me, and so make me worthy
of the
refuge I have found in you. Amen.
Just a program note, Pat Harrington, our associate who went to McAllen, was scheduled to share her experiences with us, but she and her husband had an opportunity for a little vacation. So she chose to travel a little. And I'm sure, I hope to relax and regroup after her experience. I'm wondering if Mary Helen Byrne, I know you need to leave early, but we'd love to offer you the opportunity to go first to share a little bit about your experience, if that's okay.
Oh, thank you, Eileen. Yes, well, it's nice to see everybody and my good companion, Joan Sullivan. And I know that you had an opportunity to read our reflections. We were there from in Laredo from July 5th to the 13th. And what I was thinking about today, I thought I'd just start out by saying that I grew up on the border between Linwood and Summers Point. Literally, if you fell out the window of our house, you were in the next town. And I went to school in the border, if you will, in Ocean City. You cross the bay to Summers Point, and you probably remember why people cross the bay from Ocean City to Summers Point, because the bars are in Summers Point, and there's no bars in Ocean City. And I thought, well, they're borders, but there was no difference other than the bars. And so one of the first reflections that I wanted to share that stayed with me is how close yet how far. The last night we were there, Joan and Lois, who was from Manhattan College, we went to the river, which you could see out the windows or of where we stayed in Laredo, and we could look across the river and know that life was very different on the other side, and see people on the other side, closer than Ocean City is to Summers Point. And not only, so that stayed with me, so close yet so far. And people traveled from, as we know, from Central America and even South America. We met people from Peru who had worked so hard to get to that river and then get across, and knowing that 90% will be deported. So that reflection of staying so close so far has stayed with me. Another reflection is the barriers, not borders, but barriers of language and of masks. Of course, the whole time we were there, you never saw anybody's whole face almost. And I don't know any Spanish except gracias. So I kept saying gracias no matter what. And tried to cross barriers of language. For example, when we were giving out cookies as part of the meal, it was an opportunity to get a little close to somebody. Or a barrier of language when we tried to say, okay, we're all going to clean up and kind of help out. So it was like a family atmosphere in the dining room where we ate. And another thing that I then thought, well, I really can't, I don't know English. I mean, I don't know Spanish. So I thought about, we had two young men who were guards, security people. We had other people who volunteered to cook. And we had a wonderful maintenance man, which some of you might have met as Oscar, who was a unique character in himself. And I thought, well, how could I be present to those persons and kind of minister to them who are going to stay there after I left? And I think both Joan and I did minister to them as ministers.
Yes.
You know,
we did.
just kind of get to know them. A third thing that stays with me is the care for the people that we were with from all the different countries, the care they had for each other out of nothingness. And when I was watching some of the recent transition of all the people from Afghanistan, I could see some of them had, they were wheeling out their belongings, or they had a knapsack or something. Our persons had nothing. They couldn't bring anything across. And even when I think about pictures of Ellis Island, the Irish had something it looked like. So what stayed with me was the way all the people that we ministered to cared for each other in the midst of nothingness.
Yes.
When we went into the clothes room, helping each other find clothes rather than clothes for me or clothes for myself. And that beautiful spirit, it's the communal spirit, as we know, is more dominant in other cultures than in our Anglo background. And that really stayed with me, and I'm as a worldview of the communal caring for each other. A fourth thing was, as I saw all the persons there, I thought, we really need you, and you're going to be deported. Mayor Kenny here in Philadelphia is saying we need a population, we need new people in Philadelphia, and yet how hard the opportunity will be, because the credible fear that the people from Afghanistan have is not really validated for the most part of the people that we met at Laredo. And I just experienced their energy, their desire to learn, but knowing the welcome would be somewhat different. And then the final thing I would want to share is, I was thinking about, Jesus sent people out in groups, 2 by 2, or to be part of a group. And an unexpected benefit I felt during the time, or the grace, when Joan and I were there, we met 5 Dominican sisters who were serving. Our times overlapped. A presentation sister, an Augustinian from Villanova who had known Jean Faustman in Peru, and sisters from Erie, SSJs from Erie. And we also met a whole office of Catholic Charities from Portland, Oregon. And so an unexpected benefit was feeling part of the whole country, especially the sisters or religious, in service. And so that for me was another blessing. And the final blessing was the gift of the congregation to be able to go. Eileen, that was really such a powerful moment when I read your letter, or the council's letter, and said, will you go? And go. And so I'm just grateful for all those blessings, and most importantly, the blessing of our congregation to send us forth. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Mary Helen. Joan, is there anything else you'd like to add? Mary Helen did a great job, but
She really did. I think that, and I was just pondering the notes of the reflection that we had sent out about, I prayed before and during, and I still pray, to be that healing presence. And I think that was one of the gifts. There was a mutuality. They were so healing of each other, and they offered healing to us, because sometimes we can get so caught up in the here and now and the material, but they had nothing. There was a woman across from me on the plane going home, and all she had was a flimsy little blouse and capris and her envelope, how they would hug their papers to their heart, and her little 2-year-old. And that was all she had in the whole wide world. And I thought, and we have so much. So I just pray that we can continue to be that healing presence in all situations. And Mary Helen, you get A+. Thank you.
It's a good partner, that's why.
thanks so much, Joan.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Connie and or Peg, you were the ones that went, I think you were our first team to go. So if you remember your experiences and would want to share them, we'd be happy. Whoever wants to go first.
Okay, I'd be happy to start. We went to Laredo April 14th to 29th, which seems like such a long time ago now with all that's happening in the world. And I remember as I'd watch the news at night, I would say, they need nuns at the border. They need nuns at the border. Every night you'd see the chaos. Well, then, lo and behold, the letter came from our council on March 25th and said, you're invited to go to the border. And for me, I like signs. And so the first sign was the letter from the council came on March 25th, Feast of the Annunciation. I thought that was significant. And also, it was the day after St. Oscar Romero. So all this just touched my heart. And so I have to go. I just have to go. And fortunately, I'm in a situation where I could go. So when Peg came home from work that day, I shared it with her and she said, okay, I'm on board. So Peg did the work of contacting the sites that the LCWR had suggested. And the first one to get back to us was Laredo. So we thought, okay, that's where we're going. And Peg said, you want it sooner or later? And they said, sooner. And I guess another sign for me was when I told my family, not that they're unfortunately big into immigrants, but my brother said that Laredo had been a Jeopardy answer like 2 weeks before. So that clearly was a sign that I should go. And then my sister sent me the YouTube of Johnny Cash singing The Streets of Laredo. So I was good to go. So we ended up there and we did kind of what I'm sure you all did. Cook breakfast, serve it, clean up, talk, help the people to get whatever they need. And we didn't know what we were doing half the time, but that was all right. We just did whatever. But as Mary Helen said, the people, they were just so grateful for everything. I'm thinking of when we would bring the lunch out on those little carts and serve the sandwiches or whatever it was. People did not come up for seconds, even if we had a whole lot, until we came and said to them, there's more here, come up, you're welcome to get it. They were just so respectful of each other that they would not take more. And you knew they were hungry, they had to be hungry. But they were just so wonderful. And because it was a respite center, a lot of them were just there overnight, as you know. So we'd see them one day and then we'd come in the next day and they'd be gone, which was good for them. But, you know, I felt like I wanted to have more of a relationship with them and get to know them better.
Yeah.
When they would be in line for whatever, I did often say, now, where are you from? And usually if they said El Salvador, Honduras, Guatemala, I'd start to cry, you know, and then they'd be consoling me. But I just felt so awful for them and for their long journeys. And I guess for me, just their goodness touched me so much. But I keep thinking in this year of Joseph, how Joseph had to take Mary and Jesus and flee to Egypt. I figured they were the first asylum seekers. And I imagine Joseph at the border and the Border Patrol asking for his papers, for his visa, for his documents to get into Egypt. So, well, you know, I don't have them. Well, why are you here? Because an angel in a dream told me to come. I said, oh, that's not quite in gospel, but imagine that. And I think of our people today who are fleeing the same way so that their children will not be killed, their children will not die. And I think of, when I think of people coming here, it's not, they want a better life, but that doesn't mean a 2-car garage or an in-ground swimming pool. It just means so that their children will not die, basically. We had one woman, Peg and I used to see her cleaning, and we said, is she from the neighborhood? Who is she? She'd been there a while. We come to find out she was from Venezuela, and she had been a private detective in Venezuela, but she was there because she and her 18-year-old daughter had been in Mexico for the protocols, stay in Mexico protocols put in place by the Trump administration. And while they were there trying to do the right thing, the drug cartel came up and wanted the daughter to be a prostitute for them. So Margot and her daughter just jumped into the Rio Grande and came across, and then were picked up. And Margot was here for a while and no daughter. So Becky, the director, was so wonderful. She got on the phone right away, tracked down the daughter, got her over here. Then she tested positive for COVID, so she had to be in a separate house. But the stories were just unbelievable. And the director, Becky, was wonderful. She had grown up in Laredo. She knew the whole world. One day she was calling ICE. She said, I'm calling the head of ICE. His mother used to come here for senior citizens bingo. So she knew everybody. There was a good relationship with ICE, CBP, all that. It was a wonderful lesson for me just to see how people can work together, even though they might have different views on things. And I think I'm probably rambling, but just one or two things. That our last day we got to sit and talk with Becky, and we said, now how many, when the people leave and they get to their family or their sponsor and they have a court date, they go to court, how many of them are granted asylum? And she said, hardly anybody. After all that, they'll probably be deported. Oh, yeah. That was just so heart-wrenching to see these people who are so good, and just I just can't really think about that. And I know from the past that sometimes people would go to their court date, and before they could get to the judge, ICE would arrest them and deport them before they could even get to the judge. And this year, the Biden administration put an end to that. They said they can't do that. But I remember when I was at the Welcome Center, one time a group of us went downtown to the courtroom and surrounded a woman so that ICE wouldn't pick her up before she got to the judge. We just stayed with her in this waiting room until the judge could see her. Anyway, let me let Peg take over, because I could ramble on forever. But go ahead, Peg.
You're a good
Thanks,
rambler.
Connie. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to pick up where Connie started off with the call. When that letter came out from the congregation and the LCWR, immediately I heard the word go, just go. And it wasn't go to do a certain thing, but just go to be with. And it certainly was an experience of not being the administrator or the one making decisions or organizing or arranging things differently. It was just go, roll up your sleeves and do whatever is needed. And I think that we together tried to do that and balance that out. Task-wise, we spent most of our time in the kitchen.
Yeah.
And we would go in the morning. We were the chief cooks. And we would go in the morning and just have to open the refrigerators and see what was there or wasn't there, and ask them, well, how many people are we preparing for? Well, we have about 70. And we would start getting something together, and then a bus would pull up and we would have 40 more. So I used to call it the multiplication of loaves and fishes. And that's kind of what our main task was. The other main task was to be aware and take care of the needs of the people over in the COVID house. So, and that's where my ministry here came into play, because I was very comfortable with all the PPE and could easily move into that position. But yeah, task-wise, that's about it. I have to say that the call continues to evolve as time goes on. And when we first came home, of course, coworkers were asking, so what happened? What did you do? All that. And then we wrote for the newsletter. And at that point, I did a poem. And the poem was more capturing or trying to capture a little bit from the eyes of the people who were actually coming to this country. All the waiting that they do, all the lines that they're in, all the things that they just have open hands to receive whatever they can. The other thing that happened for both Connie and I was the parish that we're living in Margate, the Altar Rosary Society asked us to come and speak. And so We went and we planned what we were saying. And I said to Connie, I can't just do this as we went on this trip and this is who we saw and this is what we did. So we tried to open it up to some reflection questions, and not too much happened with it that night. But the following week I was in ShopRite and two people stopped me to further the conversation, which was wonderful, because one-on-one is where it tends to really happen. But apparently something happened in the bigger group also. And so I look on my experience right now is anytime anybody asks me, they're asking because they have some confidence or trust in me, and they want to hear about my experience and what happened to me in terms of immigration. I don't usually push the topic, but that's where the questions usually come from other people. Once they hear about the experience, then we can go to what about immigration in this country? What about laws? What about advocating? What immigrants have you met or not met, et cetera? And then more recently, I have to say, the call has made me stop and think about, most of you know, I was in Peru for a good number of years. And one of my take homes was this poverty is how most of the world lives. What we live is the exception, but what those people live is the norm for most of the world. So I looked at what happened at the border and I said, well, this isn't just poverty. It is poverty, but it's also violence. This violence that people have experienced and are experiencing. And so I asked myself, how do I contribute to violence? Where do I keep my mouth shut? Or where do I push when I should be yielding? So it has made me look at violence in my own life and to speak to it when I see it around me. And then the last thing I want to say connects with what Mary Helen said. I am so very grateful to this congregation for furthering this possibility, not just for me, but for us, because I think it has made an impact on me. It makes me look at the whole experience of the Afghanis coming here in a different light than I might have otherwise. And part of our prayer was break open my heart. And that's what I hope happens for me, but also really for us, break open our hearts. Thank you.
Thanks, Peg. Well, I think these Zoom gatherings give all of us an opportunity, even if we haven't been there, give us an opportunity to have our heart broken all over again. Joan William, do you want to take us to McAllen?
Thanks, Eileen. Okay. My experience started, well, actually, I went thinking, oh, I'll ease myself in. I arrived Saturday night and I thought, Sunday, I'm just going to scope out the center. So I talked to Sharon and Kathy Burton, who, by the way, are my heroes, Sharon White and Kathy Burton. And they said, well, we'll meet at the shelter and then we're going to go see the border and you'll get an idea. So we got to the shelter. I had only been there less than 10 hours. Get to the shelter the next morning and some young woman runs up to Sharon and Kathy and she said, sisters. They had nowhere else to turn, so they turned to the two nuns they knew. Sisters, we have no one in Farmacia. And all these people had just come in. And as luck would have it, I'm speaking Spanish now. So I got my gentle entry was more like being thrown into the deep end in Farmacia. And at that moment, I was the only one there. And I thought, oh my God, I said yes to the pharmacy thing. So I'm saying yes. All these people are at the counter and all this medicine is behind me because it's like a bar in McAllen. It was just like a club, and it was stacks of rows and it's all over the counter medications, diapers, formula. And I'm thinking, okay, where do I begin? Which sort of became a little bit my way of thinking every day as I walked in, like, just get in there and do what you can, one at a time. So I think, and I tried to express this because my little reflection, I thought I was just writing to Eileen Francis Mary Marnian, and then I saw it on the e-newsletter and I'm like, oh, I'm glad I didn't say anything bad. I was just sort of sharing, the overwhelming experience that it was. They were numb. The people who came in were numb. I too am thinking that that's probably what's going to happen to these Afghan refugees. They just so docilely, meekly stood there in line, clinging to that one thing in their children, that one thing. And I know that because I talked to them back at the Farmacia, and they were telling me how they lost their belongings along the way. Most were from Central America. They had to exchange it for their transportation, exchange their things for food, exchange it just to get out of the way of the bad guys. They were so docile and looked numb, and they were moved from place to place, really like sheep being herded. That just touched me and broke my heart right from the very beginning. We handed them that little American Red Cross bag, and that was about it. They never let their kids get too far out of their reach, I guess, from what they had lost along the way. Like the other sisters who have talked so far, I looked at their nothing and looked around, like even in my little office here, all the stuff that I have. I can't tell you when the last time I got transferred, I had like 2 suitcases. And I'm sure that's the same for many of us. We're carrying around a lot of stuff. They had no privacy at the place. Now, because of the delight of being able to speak a little Spanish, I was in the Farmacia every single day. I ran to the bathroom, which was in the clothing room, and saw what they were going through. Kathy and Sharon and the other good sisters. Like, we had a bunch of CSJs working there. But I never even saw where I could see showers, but I never got out of my little area. So it's sort of myopic. People came, they were so sick. Everybody was sick. I'm sure the same is happening. And they were just begging for somebody to care for their children. That broke my heart too, because we weren't allowed to give certain medications, even though it was all over the counter. But since they had no rights, no freedom, they were just not allowed to go out to a pharmacy and get baby Benadryl. We had it behind us, which was so frustrating to me, because we were told we cannot give anything to a child under 2. But even though it was sitting on the counter, they had no right to leave the shelter. So they could have gone and gotten it themselves. They had no money, no rights, and we couldn't do it. So that was a very huge frustration, personal frustration for me, because I think that's wrong. I still think it's wrong, but it was a policy. I shared this with Eileen. I am so grateful. Everybody said it, to the community for giving me this opportunity. I work with the Hispanic immigrants here, and I was telling all the adults that I work with, literally hundreds in different communities, where I was going and why. It was an incredible thing because people started sharing their story of how they got here. And they were, now I work with the very materially poor. So people would make it a point, and we were Zooming because this was still COVID here in North Carolina. They would literally look for me in church on Sundays where we were allowed to distance and wear masks, and they'd shove a $5 bill in my hand and say, here, take this, and I'm thinking, dear God, these are people who have nothing down here, but who understood where these dear folks were coming from. So I'm very grateful for the congregation for letting me have this opportunity. It has changed me. My heart was already pretty soft and mushy to begin with, but it got a little bit more tender, maybe, in how I look at people. Tender in how I want to treat people, all the people around me. When I think about what I saw and what I know our Afghan brothers and sisters are going to deal with coming into our country, I just get it's still a matter more of emotion and tears for me. I just responded. This is the part that I'm particularly grateful to God for and the congregation. I had been praying, oh, I wish there was more we could do, because remember, it was on the news. And then we got the letter. And I'm thinking, I have to be really careful what I pray for, because it was as though God immediately answered my prayer, because I really was praying. Oh, I wish I could do more. Volunteer. Okay. So that it was good for me in that sense. I talked with a lot of people in our congregation, and I know it wasn't just me. There were people who could not stop their work. I had the luxury. I could stop my work. It was right after Easter. It was the first week in May. I literally could put a pause. I know many of you cannot put a pause on your ministries. I could. I think a lot of people were hesitant. Oh, I don't speak any Spanish. Didn't matter the language, but I was lucky that I had that. I felt like I had the whole SSJ congregation with me. And again, I had two heroines of mine, Kathy Burton and Sharon White, who constantly were buying pants for the ladies, who were just spending all their energy organizing this clothing room. And we had chaos. In McAllen, when I was there, it was not organized chaos. It was chaos. Nobody could talk to anybody else. Nobody could filter the word down. It was. Sharon White, had she been given a couple more weeks, probably could have whipped that place into order. However, she didn't stay that long. I'm asking God now, what next, dear God, for me? What next? Okay, well, that was my jumble of thoughts and emotions. Thanks, Eileen.
Thanks, Joan. Thanks so much.
I'm going to mute myself now.
Okay. Joan, I think you said what I think we're all praying, like what next? What next can we do? So thanks for saying the words. Well, maybe Charlene, if you're okay, we could travel to Arizona. Charlene here.
There were two places on the list, Tucson and San Diego. And I just thought, like, if I'm going, I have family in San Diego and my brother's in Tucson. So I thought, I'd like to go, not so much just to visit them, but I knew that I would need like support because I wasn't going with anybody. And as things evolved at Casalitas, this 85-year-old sister who was on the death list during Nicaragua's uprisings, she created this clinic there. And so Casalitas was a juvenile detention center, and they made it into a place for the people who've already gone through the border, gone through detention, gone through ISIS come, and then they could connect with their families or their sponsors. So when you walk in, it's just amazing. Like all the different sections where the rooms are painted different colors, you know, yellow and red and blue, and there's big open areas. And so when the people would come, we received between, I would say, 80 and 300 people a day. The people would stay anywhere from 8 to 36 hours. And, you know, it is really, they don't even have shoelaces. They take everything away, and they take away all their medications. They would send people with medical issues to us. So, you know, I come, Sister Eileen, you know, tells me what we need to do. You know, we would make this electrolyte water because usually everybody would be dehydrated, and we had little baggies of Tylenol and Advil, and we had a real pharmacy with all the prescription meds for when, you know, the people would have them taken away. So the first day, the second day, the third day, I'm there, you know, and nobody else is coming, you know, and I'm like, you know, so I did all that. I made the little water, I did the little baggies, and then I'm like, it's ready, you know, like, and one busload came. So I went out to do what we usually do. So then by 10:30, I call Sister Eileen, and she has kind of a brogue, and she says, "Oh, sweetie, I forgot to tell you, nobody else is coming today." And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. You know, it's like really? I said, all right, but you're my backup. So, you know, I've spent most of my life career in surgery and adult medicine. I don't know much at all pediatrics and OB since the time I was doing my internship. So anyway, of course, you know, so a lot of women were pregnant and a lot of little kids, you know, so I got over it, you know, but one funny story is one lady is very, 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 very pregnant. And so Sister Eileen, this day, Sister Eileen was with me. And so she says, so when are you due? And the lady says, in 2 days. And then I'm like, oh no, you know. So then she says, Sister Eileen asked her, like, how long was your how many pregnancies have you had? And she said 6. And then she says, well, how long was your last labor? And she said 10 minutes. And I said, oh no, she'd be one of those that would just like get a pain and say, oh, and go down on the ground and pop out a baby. And it was like, oh my God, I hope this doesn't happen here, you know, like, but anyway, no, she didn't deliver. And we kept saying we did not clear her to fly. And she did, and she got to where she was going, all safe and sound. But I think the hard part was when you would ask people, you know, they would come in, and I wrote this on my blog, two different people were complaining of a headache, you know, and the one lady, you know, when we started to ask her, and again, the language, I'm not fluent, but I could muddle through. Her husband was murdered by the cartel. She was raped. You know, I don't know how long it took her, like 6 months to get, I forget which country she was from, to get to the border, to get to us, you know, and it's like, I mean, in some ways it's good to have a mask on. You know, in medicine, you have to learn like to have that straight face. But it was like, oh my God, this is like more than I could deal with, you know. But I think the other piece that was great was when people came in and they got settled and they got their room. We did have showers. They had the clothing room. They could go in. It was like a thrift store, pick out their stuff, you know, and then you saw them, especially the kids, you know, running around because we had a big open areas and toys. And, you know, it was just wonderful to see how, you know, they finally made it, you know, and in the same way, I think, what I was told is in Texas, 90% are deported, and those who make it to us, 50% get deported at some point. I did track a lot of the Ecuadorians. We have a big Ecuadorian community at St. Patrick's. And so I do encounter a lot of refugees, even at the clinic at St. John's. But one family had a Down syndrome little girl. So, you know, that just melted my heart. And so I tracked them. They came to Newark, and then through phone calls and all, and going back to this migrant clinicians network, I found out that they're in Philadelphia now, and I have their contact information. And you know, it was great. And the staff, you know, they were glad because it was like, with me there, gave them a break. So, you know, one said, you know, you could get your Arizona license and we'll expedite so you get it like real quick, you know. I said, well, yeah, I mean, I definitely want to go back because like that, they hadn't had a break through most of COVID, and it just kind of like gave them a little moment, you know, but I loved it. So.
Thanks so much, Charlene.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure they loved having you. And maybe then Lisa and Fran, you're our last two guest speakers and the most recent travelers to Laredo. If you would be good enough to share with us, that would be great. Whoever wants to go first.
Lisa, do you want to go first?
You can go. You can go.
Oh, I can go. Oh,
if
okay.
You want. I mean, it doesn't matter.
Okay. Well, it's hard to believe, really, that Lisa and I left Texas only 48 hours ago. We had a few delays along the way, a few mishaps coming and going. But it really was truly a time of being for us, at least was for me, of, you know, connecting with others, you know, folks from Nicaragua and Guatemala, the Ivory Coast, Venezuela, Cuba, Guatemala, Brazil, Colombia. I mean, they're just some of the dear neighbors that I met. And I knew, though, within a short period of time that I was in the midst of something far greater than I had ever encountered. And I realized that the people who rubbed shoulders with me in the Roper room really were Beatitude people. You know, they're the same people. They were the people that Jesus spoke about over 2,000 years ago, you know, the least likely people to receive blessings. You know, they were simple. Some were persecuted, suffered. They were mourning various losses, their homelands, separation from family members. So to stand with them, you knew there were no margins. You know, we were all one. And for me, right now, I'd like to just put some flesh on my ramblings by telling you about people that I met, lessons that I learned, and you know, who my teachers really were during the past 2 weeks. When we got there, I first encountered a man named Abraham, who was from the Ivory Coast. And he was working at the center, and he landed there because his sponsor in California backed out. He was very content, in a sense, to stay there because he was treated with such kindness. I thought he was very young, but then I found out later on he left a wife and 5 children 3 years ago. Can you imagine? 3 years ago, back in the Ivory Coast. He traveled to Brazil, learned some Spanish, traveled through other South American countries, Central American countries, until he arrived in Mexico. His parents were murdered. That's why he fled. They had their throats slit. And, he had this tremendous desire for his wife and children to eventually come to America, but to first get to Brazil. He FaceTimed them every night. And eventually, in fact, it was last week, he was placed with a sponsor in San Antonio, but certainly didn't expect to see his family for at least 3 years or more. There were also numerous men and women from Nicaragua that we saw. Some of them showed me their scars, told me of their stories about being held and bound. One man had a sling because of a broken shoulder that he sustained in Nicaragua months ago. And over again, they shared their distress about their lack of freedom of speech, and especially talked about college students and how difficult it was for them to protest, to have any kind of peaceful demonstrations at all. A man from El Salvador was there one day with his special needs son. He fled because of his fear of brutality from crime squads toward his vulnerable boy. So he thought it was better to just pick up and leave. I guess I was touched by this young Salvadoran woman who had several children. She was in the clothing room, of course, choosing clothes. And her own clothes were so soiled. She apparently had had an accident. Her clothes were soiled. She stank to high heaven, yet her focus was entirely on her children. I was just overwhelmed by her selflessness, her quiet concern, and even all of those who came into the clothing room. It was important for them, really important for them to look presentable to their family, to their friends, to their sponsors, and the time that they showed and that they showed in picking out their clothes. It exhibited to me such dignity, such pride in how they would look. And they may have been beaten down, but they were certainly not robbed of their self-worth. All of the people, all of them that I encountered had a great desire for a better life. And they all fled from certainly different injustices. And it was all of this was coupled with a deep faith in God. I can't tell you how many crucifixes and rosaries I saw, draped around people's arms and necks. And I flashed back to Karen Doyle's virtual retreat last August. I'm sure many of you were part of that, when she reflected on the woman with the hemorrhage reaching for Jesus's garment. And remember, she reminded us that tassels were everywhere if we looked. And I had that New Testament image of the Jewish woman clutching Jesus's tassel, as I observed a 15-year-old Mexican boy clutching a pair of rosaries, not once, but every time I passed him on this particular day. Or, this older Guatemalan man clutching his Bible as he put it in his new knapsack, telling me that he brought it all the way from home and that he wouldn't go anywhere without it. Or especially, there was an older Nicaraguan woman who was, putting things in her knapsack, but clutching, again, this grimy, rusty keychain that she had brought from home. And then uttered some words of gratitude to me before she left and gave me the keychain. So it was, I just saw people clutching each other, saying goodbye to their new friends, people who had been their companion for this little piece of their journey. And then they would leave for their destination. So it was all of that sense of, folks clutching the garments of God. That's what I saw over and over and over each day. Then there was Alex from Colombia, who always seemed to show joy in the midst of whatever his burdens were. And he had this belly laugh, which was infectious. And when we ran out of belts in the clothing room, Lisa and I gave him red suspenders. He wanted a picture of us with him. And I got his name later on, and I have found him on Facebook. And there he is, sitting with his uncle, smiling in North Carolina, wearing those red suspenders. What that did for me. And Jorge from Nicaragua, mopping the corridors there in Laredo, only hours after he arrived. And he told me, this was his thank you for all that he had been given. The man and woman from Guatemala who subbed for us in the clothing room because they wanted to give back something. They wanted to show their thanks before they left in the bus for Miami. There were just so many people, so many who touched me with their words of gratitude, their gestures. And I'd have to say that during the past 2 weeks, I learned a lot, really, about the power of stories and storytelling in ways that I hadn't been before. The circumstances of our stories may differ, but there is a common thread, isn't there? Our desire, our hope, our need for love. We're not alone. We all share that common thread. And most importantly, I learned that the immigrants I met live in the present moment. And that's all they have. Yes, they hope for the future, sure, but they're firmly planted in the here and now, where the future will only be a dream for them, and it'll never be a reality. And finally, I want to recall the words of a Nicaraguan man as he was packing up his knapsack. I wished him well. I said, buena suerte. I told him I hoped he did well as he continued his journey. And he turned to me and he said, continue. My life is only beginning. And that has really stayed with me. Again, as all of you have said, I really echo a big thank you to you, Eileen, the congregation, to those people who supported me with donations, prayers, good wishes. It really was a privilege. And I guess I feel I truly experienced firsthand, those shock maxims of Peter Morin from The Catholic Worker. He writes about being with the poor and how it directly demands your soul. I have a feeling of being emptied, and yet knowing that I can still give more. I'm really grateful because I can return to my ministry at the Welcome Center, certainly with a much deeper sense of what it cost our people. Lisam, Rosa, our people here, the people who come into our classes, what it costs them to be here with us now. We're with them as they are a little further ahead on their journey. But certainly, this experience will continue to make a difference each and every day as I interact with them and as I interact with more of the folks who come to our door. So thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Fran, thanks so very much. I'm almost speechless. Lisa, are you ready to share?
I will try. During the retreat I made in September of 2020, while walking on the beach in Atlantic City, the words, "Heal my heart, I love you, God," were inscribed in the sand at the water's edge. The message could be interpreted in multiple ways, but for me, it was a message from God pleading for whoever read the message to heal God's heart. The words, "I love you, God," were written in Spanish, and were about the only words I know in Spanish, and stayed with me through the following months. And so when the invitation to help at the border was sent, and Fran asked if I would be interested in going, it seemed to be a response to that message in the sand. Fran and I arrived in Laredo on Saturday, August 14th. minus our luggage, which did not arrive until Monday evening or Tuesday morning. The days without the luggage were a small reminder of how much I have and do not need. How much those who were coming through the center were also missing, but missing it permanently. When we got to the center on Monday, we were given a brief tour of the facilities and then were told we could oversee the clothing room and the laundry. The center is relatively small, with a dining room for staff and volunteers, a kitchen, an indoor area where certain families waited, laundry room, clothing room, a computer room with staff to help those coming into the center, and several storage rooms. There was a large fenced-in yard where most of the people waited, and intake was done during the heat of the day, and it was really hot. The first day, there were many fathers with young daughters, and some mothers and daughters and sons, not a lot of families. All were young. Many of them, as Fran said, were from Guatemala, from El Salvador, Nicaragua, and other countries. Truly, they came with just what they had on their backs. I didn't help in the clothing room much because I speak no Spanish. About as much gracias, no habla español was about it. But on the first day, when I was in the clothing room, a mother was looking for shoes for her little girl, and there were none near her size. So she just took socks, which was heartbreaking. That evening, Fran and I went out and we bought lots of children's shoes. Luckily, the mother and the daughter had to stay overnight to wait for transportation. So when they came into the clothing room the next day, there were shoes for the little girl. No one had shoelaces when they came, as other people have said. So getting a pair was one of the first things they looked for. They were also grateful to just get a simple string bag to put their papers in and some of the things that they might get from the clothing room. One of the days, a little girl was in the clothing room with her mother, who was trying to find something for herself. She had already gotten something for her little girl. And the little girl started to play hide and seek around this carousel of clothes with me. So she was running around and she was screeching and laughing, which was something you didn't hear too often there. So at some point she called me grandma. Of course, not knowing Spanish, I didn't really know that's what she called me. Someone else had to tell me. As we said, Fran said belts were another treasured commodity, and she told you about the man with the suspenders who was just so proud of them. Hats were another really popular item. We could not keep them in stock. The last days we were there was a huge load of clothing that came from a clothes company. So there were a lot of people that were really very generous, and there were 3 boxes of hats, and the men just loved them. I spent more of my time in the laundry room because you don't need to know Spanish to wash, dry, fold, and put away sheets and towels. The sheets were from where the rooms where the people slept, and it was a lot of physical work. The people coming in would take a shower as well as get new clothes. They received a clean washcloth, a towel, and all they needed for a shower. And they would put the towels and the washcloths back in this huge tub outside the laundry room when they were finished. Some of the washcloths were so stained from the dirt, even after they were being washed, we couldn't use them again. It just showed the dirt and the sweat that they had from all the travel they had to do to get there. Most mornings we would come in and there would be huge tubs of dirty towels and sheets in the hallway in the laundry. And by the end of the day, they were all cleaned and put away. I also spent time cleaning the bedrooms. There were 2 sets of bedrooms, one on the second floor of where all of the other rooms were, and that was for women and children. And then there was another set of bedrooms that was outside for the men. And so we cleaned them every day, swept the floor, emptied the trash, put fresh linens on the bed. And when I closed the door as the bedroom was done, I just looked at it and I thought this was probably the first decent place they had to sleep for some of them in weeks and months. And so even though I couldn't speak with them, I felt like I was trying to do something that would make their life a little bit easier, even just for that day. The first week that I was there, I worked with Teresa, who was a daughter of Charity novice. They had 4 novices there. She went to the College of St. Catherine, which is a CSJ college. So she knew our congregation and names familiar to us like Fontbonne and Medai. So we had some really nice conversations about our ministries, and that made the heavy work much later. The air conditioning was not working on the second floor where the bedrooms were, so it was really hot work. In the beginning, Laredo La Frontera is a much smaller place than McAllen, so there weren't as many beds. So we were making maybe 8 to 12 beds a day, but it took a long time to even really do that. On occasion, because it was small, everybody kind of did whatever needed to be done, even though our main jobs were working in the clothing room and the laundry, but we helped serve meals and even cook them. A breakfast one day consisted of chicken patties, tater tots, and toast. The Saturday that we got there, after all the other sisters had left, Fran and I were the only sister volunteers. We made breakfast as well as lunch and did the wash and did the beds and did the clothing. So you kind of did everything that day. As I looked through my journal, almost every day I would write, I really wish I knew a bit of Spanish, because I did find that frustrating. I used a lot of Google Translate on my phone, and the people seemed to be, fine with just talking into the phone. Then I would talk and they would read back and forth, but I did find that a bit of a hindrance. Some of the other stories that I remember were that there were 2 teenage boys who had come to the center. They had been detained in Mexico for 3 months. They went right to the hospital because they were so sick. And so when they came out, they came right to the center. They had no papers. The staff was trying to figure out what to do with them and how to help them, because they were young. They had no one else with them. Usually the people coming to the center stayed anywhere from 6 to 18 hours. And as Fran had said, there was a family that came and really helped in the clothing center for a day. And that was really helpful because they could help the people in ways that we could not. I think one of the saddest scenes for me was that there was a woman there that had a large black ankle bracelet on that was monitoring her whereabouts. And just to see that she wasn't in prison, but in a sense, it felt like she was a prisoner to me. And I wasn't sure why she had to wear one. And that was the only one that I saw. Just some final comments, I guess. The place we were wasn't really as organized as we would want, but it wasn't chaotic. There was no volunteer coordinator, so you just went in and you just saw what needed to be done and did it. But I've also felt there was a wonderful, good spirit among the volunteers and the staff, seeing what needed to be done and just doing it, truly ready for any good work. And flexibility was really key. The families were eager to move in, but grateful for what they got there. For our trip home, it took over 30 hours to get home. We were anxious to get to our destination, but that made me realize how much more the people we met were anxious to get to theirs. We saw 2 of the people who were at the center were also at the airport with us, and one of them even ended up on the plane with us. I am truly grateful for the eye-opening and heart-stretching experience, people who were leaving everything. Although Laredo itself is in Texas, it's literally a stone's throw from Mexico, and most people there speak more Spanish than English. So it was a much more Mexican influence, a whole different feel from northeastern Pennsylvania. Truly, we're a diverse nation. If we could just recognize the beauty in that diversity and those seeking our shores. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lisa. I believe we've heard from everyone who was on today's schedule, and we're so grateful. I know so many people mentioned, being grateful to the congregation, but the congregation is so grateful that you were able to go. And we know that there were so many circumstances that allowed that freedom of your schedule and the opportunity to go, and your health, and so many pieces. But I think everyone would agree, the phrase where one of us is, all of us are, it's, I certainly felt each time you traveled someplace, I was conscious of you, and I know everyone else was too. We were all praying with you and for you, and so grateful that you were there. And hearing the stories, it makes me feel like I was there. You still, your heart gets broken over again. So, does anyone have any final words? Because I just start crying when we talk about this. You just raise your hand. We have time for maybe just one or two comments, if there's any.
Eileen,
Joan,
what shall we do about the Afghan situation? What can our congregation do? I
well,
read
Joan,
the letter.
pardon me?
I read the letter.
Yeah, I know. We're certainly keeping up to date with anything that LCWR sends us. And you probably saw that there was the Catholic bishops are partnering with government agencies, and they're willing to fund volunteers to go and be present, at different, we think is different military bases where the Afghanis will be taken. We're trying to get as much news out to folks, and we're also trying to get a sense of where the appropriate donation should go. We're getting mixed messages about that, so we're just trying to get some sense of what can be done. So if anybody should get any insights or anything, please send them in care of me, and I'll pass them on, because we want to share whatever we have with those in need. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. One of the graces that followed the experience, was the ability, and somebody alluded to it, to share with people in our lives what it was all about, and kind of taking home mystique of politics and prejudice and, those people. For example, my pastor asked me to write an article for the church bulletin to share the experience. And that was very, very positive. Got a lot of positive feedback from the people. Even in my own family, some of whom were skeptical about my going, just had a change of heart themselves. So there is grace upon grace, and there's grace that flows afterwards that we don't even expect. And I just hope that we can keep our eyes and ears open for those graces as well.
Thanks, Joan. Okay, Margie.
Yes, I was so looking forward to, listening and learning. And I guess something that really struck me is, hearing of the experiences, and the depth at which it affected each of you, and hearing it directly. I had read not all, but many of the experiences that were available, but just hearing it directly, you've been changed. It's just very powerful. Without a doubt, that's absolutely sincere, and it just was very, very. I'm very grateful for all of your sharing and the depth and honesty and all that you shared from your heart and from your experience. Thank you.
Seal Kavanaugh, you're muted.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks. It's better that way. Just two things I would say, and we've already talked a little bit about this, but some of us who have been to the border have already been involved in lobbying phone calls to legislators about different policies and advocating to abolish 42 to get rid of that MPP. And a lot of it is, if Congress doesn't act, the Supreme Court's going to keep punting on this stuff. So we really have to work with the legislators. So if anybody's interested in that, we'd be happy for the help. And even if you didn't go, we need people present at these meetings so that they can see that people are involved. And the other thing is, as we were leaving the airport, when we came home, we walked a family out that had been in the center and just have been texting back and forth with them, like once or twice a week. How are you? How's it going? Do you need anything? Have done nothing for them. Nothing. They're not asking for anything. But I think if we could all find ways to just accompany one person, sometimes that's a way. The border, Charlene said this in another context, the border is everywhere. The border is not just that pharmacy counter in McAllen or the bus, the border is everywhere. So how can we be present at the border where we live? And just one small thing could be really, really powerful. Thanks.
Thanks so much. Well, I think that's a great way to end our time together. One small thing can make a great big difference. I want to thank everybody who joined us. And, I think as the stories continue to be told and retold, maybe tonight at dinner, you can share some of these conversations that we heard today with your dinner companions. And thanks to all those who shared and were able to go to the border. I keep thinking, how lucky we are that we have so many sisters that really make all of us look so good. So thanks so much for making us look good in Laredo or McAllen, in Arizona and Tucson, and beyond. So thanks a million. And if you come up with any good ideas, let us know. If anybody knows how to work on any of these problems, let us know. So we'll say good night, enjoy your dinner, and thanks a million for joining us. Take care.